Well, I think that people are frightened, and they are well aware that uh, things cannot go on like this. Uh, all science fiction fans know this. Our politicians do not know this. They tend to assume that things will be much the same in 50 years as they are now. But actually, that is not the case. And you can pick your reason for not thinking this. Maybe we will have climate change and the sea levels will rise and many cities will be flooded. And what will we do then? Or maybe there will be a terrible plague, which we cannot stop and which will be much more dangerous than COVID,
Yeah.
which shows us how things spread. But fortunately, it has not killed very many people, but the next one might. Um, and there are other dangers, which, as I say, you can pick your favorite one. But another one, which has been very, very evident to me for 50 years, is that the energy will run out. The oil will run out. It is running out. What will we do then? At the moment, we have cheap energy. In future, well, maybe we will have cheap energy. There are technical solutions, but it's like space exploration. There are political and financial problems. And this is just my view. The real disaster of the 20th century is that politicians never read science fiction. So they never think further than the next election in 4 years, in 5 years. What happens in 50 years? Oh, not our business, but it is their business. So I think there is a gap between popular awareness and political awareness. And this makes, not everybody, but it makes many people seriously concerned. And I could go on. We're going to run out of energy. We are going to run out of rare earths, which we need for our microchips. We are going to run out of water. Already water is short. You know, most of the Western United States of America is a desert. At the moment, it is kept alive by irrigation projects, by giant canals. But already the population is getting too large for the water supply. Well, what is the solution to that? I know. We'll steal it all from Canada. Yes, I think that may not work, you know. But already we're seeing stories which envisage this kind of possibility. Perhaps I should have said science fiction was much more optimistic than fantasy, but things have kind of turned down. But it still is in a way, because there is a belief that although there are problems, there are solutions, scientific and technical solutions, but we need to carry them out. And that, of course, is what's not happening. As for science fiction and fantasy, I would say that these two genres grew up together. They grew up together from the 1920s in the kind of magazines which were published in America. Amazing Science Fiction, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, fantastic stories. You know, most authors wrote wrote both fantasy and science fiction. So there was a kind of similarity between them in their origins. Though people were well aware of the kind of different rules that they followed. I would say that science fiction deals with something which we know is not true yet. Fantasy deals with something which we know is not true. But actually, the boundary line is blurred. And at a very early stage, I think, authors who wrote both forms, they decided, I think you mentioned this, that actually any sufficiently developed technology looks like magic. Yes. Well, perhaps magic is a technology which we have not yet understood. And both magic and science, they suggested, were ways of trying to control the universe. And possibly magic is just a technology we have not taken any interest in because we assume it's not true. But there are many strange things which we cannot explain. Possibly if these were better understood, then we would have a magic technology. And the idea of a magic technology is very powerful in fantasy. It should have laws to tell you how it works. And the person who actually promoted this, I think, was the writer J.G. Fraser, an early anthropologist. In his book, The Golden Bough, which eventually became, 12 volumes thick, but right at the start, he suggested that magic, as practiced in many cultures, did actually operate on principles. And he tried to reduce these to laws like Newton's laws of motion. And the science fiction authors thought, that's good, but it needs some work. Let's tidy this up. Let's make it more precise. Let's do the experiments. In my early, in my teenage years, I spent a lot of time doing experiments with thought reading and with predicting. With a friend of mine, we had cards with different symbols on, and I would look at one and not tell him what it was, and I would try to send it to him by mental projection. And we got quite good at it, but we couldn't explain it. That's all. There was something there, but we didn't know how it worked. This has been developed by many authors, including Jack Vance, actually, who wrote about it very cleverly and with great subtlety. But it was a fairly general idea, and it still is. Actually, I think Tolkien and his friend Lewis thought about this a lot. And I think somewhere in Lord of the Rings, Galadriel says to Sam Gamgee, you seem to use the word magic for quite different things. And I think that was probably Tolkien's view as well, that our popular images of magic take in all kinds of things like, witches and wizards and necromancers and crystal balls and reading tarot cards, but they're actually different. They're not the same thing. And Lewis obviously thought about this as well. There's a scene in one of his books where one child says to another child, they want to call on Aslan, do we have to draw a pentacle and say spells? And the other child, who is wiser, says, no, that is trying to compel Aslan to do what we want, and we don't do that. So I think Galadriel would agree with him there. You cannot use this magic. And of course, magic also, as Galadriel says, is very, I won't say dangerous, but you can get the wrong answers. You look in her mirror and you may see what is happening, or you may see what might happen, or you may see something which isn't going to happen. You can't tell. So all that takes us back to, as it were, extrasensory perception. Yes, sometimes I say I used to know when something was going to happen, quite sure about it. But again, I could not refine this ability. But if I'd had a mirror of Galadriel, maybe I could have done better. Science fiction writers and fantasy writers agree that there are things we don't understand, but we would like to. talking about Tolkien first, I think his view of technology was caused by one phenomenon which was very familiar. During his lifetime, I mean, his early lifetime, he was born in 1892. What happened all over England and many other places was that the cities spread out. They got bigger and bigger and bigger. So that places which he remembered and which I remember as kind of peaceful rural places with trees and fields and and birds and beasts are now just full of houses. And people, especially who lived out in the country, as Tolkien did for a while at Sarehole, found that it all came out towards them. It surrounded them. It took over. And this was true also in Oxford. I mean, have you ever visited Oxford? Don't go. You know why? In the summer, you can't walk down the street. It's so crowded. You can't drive anywhere because there's so many cars. And actually, you can't even find a place to park your car. It's completely blocked up. And I think that someone like Tolkien, who was used to walking into work, would find that, really very hard to bear. So I can quite see why he resented this kind of surge of building and industrialization and motorization, and it made him regret what he'd lost. Well, many people felt like that, and I feel like that some of the time. But it is all a result, of course, of increasing population. We just have many more people, and they have to be somewhere. There is an Icelandic fairy tale, where the bishop is going around blessing the coast of Iceland to get rid of the trolls and the orcs and the creatures and the hidden people. And he gets to a certain place, and a voice from the cliff says to him, "Even the wicked need a place to be." And so the bishop doesn't bless that bit. He leaves it as a reservation for the wicked. Well, yes, I think we feel we need a kind of safe space. And it's difficult to find one in these days. As for the way technology affects arts and literature, well, it's obviously made things more interactive. All my little nephews and great nephews spend their time on their screens going like this all the time, because they're playing a game, but it's a narrative game. It's a game with a story, and the story is affected by what they do. But this has meant that they become much more active, and they become much more violent, and they're less thoughtful. So sometimes I wonder whether it will be possible to write more thoughtful or reflective stories. And another thing, of course, is that we now have publishing has become an industry. And in my opinion, publishers, and I don't get on very well with publishers, publishers always want something that was successful last time because they think that's a certain success. But actually, people want something that isn't like what it was last time. You know that the Harry Potter first book was rejected by 28 publishers because they wanted another Tolkien. And she wasn't another Tolkien, but she was going to be a success, and they couldn't see it. And of course, Tolkien too had great difficulty getting published because Sir Stanley Unwin thought it would be a failure. He thought they were going to lose money on it because it wasn't like what happened last time. But the more publishers control the authors, the harder it is for an author to come in with a new idea. You've got to sell it somehow. I notice quite a few authors recently have been successful because they self-publish without the resources of a publisher, and the word spreads on social media. So some very successful science fiction has been produced that way. For instance, the book by Andy Weir, The Martian. It's kind of a desert island story on Mars, okay, and it only has one character. That's the character on Mars, and publishers looked at it and thought, oh, that won't work, but it did. He self-published it. It sold many, many copies, and they made a movie of it, which was very successful too. But for every one of these, I think, who fights his way through, I suspect there are 20 who give up, but they may have had good ideas. We don't know because we won't see them. So industrialization, I think, does tend to something like monotony. You know, I look at the books that come in from me for the Wall Street Journal, and I think, okay, vampire story, werewolf story, Game of Thrones story. You know, at the end of that, I think, well, have I got anything left? Of course, some of them may be good. There's certainly some are better than others, but I find it quite easy to classify them, and that's not good. We need things which are original. Well, that's not easy to develop. It is also harder now for authors to get started. When I was young, if you look at what's behind me, you will see basically rank on rank of old science fiction magazines. I have about 2,000 of them. So if you wanted to write a story, you could send it to Astounding Science Fiction or Galaxy, or you could send it to New Worlds, you could send it to Fantastic Stories, you could send it to, what was the other one? Astounding Stories. You could send it to Worlds of If, you could send it to Interzone, you know, and you get a story published, and that encouraged you, so you wrote another story. Terry Pratchett, the very successful author of fantasy, he sold his first story to a forgotten journal called Science Fantasy when he was only 13. So he got started very early. But now, if you want to write something, the publisher won't look at you unless you have a nice thick, you know, I'm just trying to dig them out. You've got to have something like this, you know, 600 pages, see skeletons and things on the front. That's what they want. Not many people, I think, have the confidence to write 600 pages and send it in. But many of the people who wrote a 30-page story and sold it, they might have gone on to write 600-page novels if they'd had a start, if they'd had a first success. So I think that things have become narrower and, you know, more like this. There's not much side vision. But I may be wrong. Old people always think that things are getting worse, and perhaps I'm mistaken about this. But that's what I see. Oh yes, I mean, I've been locked up for 5 months now, Emirhan, and I couldn't manage without. Well, I've got a small bookshelf there with about 30 science fiction magazines, and I read those. And when I finish those, I put them back in their place, and I get another 30 out. So it's been a great asset to me all my life, and you know, I never know what the next one will be. Yes, they've been a great resource to me, and I gave a lecture the other day, another online lecture, and at the end I put up a big reading list of fantasies, and I told the viewers, I said, look, there's nothing better you can do than go and buy all these. You can buy them in used bookstores for, you know, $2. Buy them all. You get more entertainment from that than you will from anything else for the same money. And I'm sure that's absolutely correct. A big reading list of books you haven't read yet is the way to deal with all the problems of life.